Hello, I'm Phil Svitek, and welcome to his Dark Materials Season 3, Episode 2, called The Break, spoiler review and breakdown, right? So right off the bat, I assume that you've seen the episode, right? So I'm going to talk about it in its full extent, right? But I will also break it up into two parts. The first part being for people that have only been watching the series, right? And then the second half, I will call another spoiler and get into theories based on the books, right? Meaning I've read the books that this is based on, his Dark Materials, a trilogy, the Golden Compass, the Subtle Knife, and the Amber Spyglass, written by Phillip Pullman. And because of that, I have certain knowledge, right? So I'm going to be able to share that and kind of enrich the discussion because of that knowledge. But of course, I want to be sensitive to the people that have only seen the TV show. So that's why the distinction for that. Anyway, without further ado, let me dive into this episode, right? You know, quite an action-packed climax, right? As I made mention in the previous episode for episode 1, everything was kind of coming to a head as far as this was concerned, right? We knew how everyone was splintered off, but it was all heading towards Lyra. You know, Mrs. Coulter, her mother, she's keeping her captive, and I discussed last episode, you know, the pain of that. And I thought that was really kind of brought to a forefront here really well. In particular, Will talking with Amma, the little girl. You know, she said, you know, what mother would do this? And, you know, Will says, you know, this mother essentially. And in particular, one of the most powerful scenes of this entire episode for me was Will and Mrs. Coulter talking, right? Because she really knew how to essentially dig deep and try to get his empathy, you know, to the extent that she could, by talking about his mother and the bond between a child and their mother, and also saying that it's not just the child that needs the bond, it's the mother, right? And that's what really, certainly by the end of the episode, really stumbled Will and shattered the subtle knife, because his mind wasn't pure in order to be able to cut into the other world. And because of that, you know, turbulence in his mind, it's what caused the knife to shatter. And so I like that it was layered in throughout as much as possible to be able to, you know, it didn't come out of nowhere, right? And just a very powerful scene between the two of them. And, Ruth Wilson and, Ruth is the actress's name. And then Amir, I believe is how you say his name, who plays Will. Really, really powerful, right? Because we've gotten a lot of powerful scenes with Lyra and Mrs. Coulter, but not really Will and her. And so this was just a joy to watch. So really powerful stuff. I also, kind of want to touch upon Amma a little bit, because seeing it portrayed was really great. She is in the books, that's not a spoiler in any way. But really getting her visually and, represented through this actor, I thought she added a lot, because it shows that we all have a part to play in something grand. And, to borrow a quote from The Matrix, the path of the one is made by the many, right? And so if Lyra, as it seems, there's this importance to her, whatever role she has to play, well, it doesn't just happen without everyone else's involvement. And even though, for all intents and purposes, Amma seems like a weakling and things of that nature, certainly by the powers that may be, she does a brave thing and she helps out and she figures out a way to do, what she can. And that, it just struck a chord with me. And I thought that was really well done. She wasn't scared of the spirit. And I thought that was a touching moment, because, certainly Will's being tested in particular right now. He set off to find Lyra, and that caused the death of one of the angels, Baruch, I believe is how you say his name. And Bartholomew was hurt by this, and Will, you can tell he feels responsible for this. And yet, he's going to continue on with this, because you don't essentially want to be a double loser. But in all of this, he still thinks he has the best plan, right? And so he essentially told Bartholomew to kind of stay invisible. He didn't want to frighten anyone off. And yet it was the right choice. It's what got the girl to open up, because up until that point, she was frightened. And then seeing the spirit, and she could tell that it was a good spirit, right? Of course, it's an angel, but I'm just using the terminology that, she utilized, right? So, I really appreciated what Amma brought to the table here. Speaking of the Bartholomew character and his bond with his partner, I thought that was a very touching moment. That is something that is in the books. And I'm going to talk about, I'll talk about the book stuff and tie it into it if it's already happened, just to confirm, this is kind of what happened, but I won't further speculate of what may come and things of that nature. So just want to make that distinction until I call that spoiler warning. But anyway, so this was always part of the books, and seeing it represented on screen, that it was two men and the love that they felt for each other. It resonated deeper than it did in the book, simply because, you see it. And also, I think, the books were written decades ago at this point, 2 decades, give or take. And, I was a kid when I first read them, and, they resonated now, in light of kind of, it takes on a new meaning, even just having started the series to where it is now. That's the beautiful thing about art, is that we see things in it differently based on where we are at in our lives, and having gone through the pandemic and just kind of things politically and of that nature. It's very interesting to view it from that perspective as well. Because especially just on the surface level of it, going against the church, and having essentially homosexuals and whatnot, I think that's very powerful in terms of, what it was always trying to achieve, because it was always there, and things of that nature. Now, interestingly enough, just as a kind of quick tangent to all of this, I don't know. For me, I actually don't think it's as anti-religion as it makes it up to be. It's more of, if anything, organized religion and just culticism, and the inability to think and have free thoughts and uneducated and so forth. I think it's aspiring to something higher. So it's not against God in that way. From my interpretation, it's actually aspiring to be something really grand in that way. And it's just using, I don't know, call it the allegory, maybe not the right word, of religion and that, because it's just an easy sort of jumping off point. You might disagree, and that's totally fine. I just still think, I still think there's a world in which religion and, outright belief in God is fine, as long as it doesn't get fanatical and bastardized, which certainly, the magisterium represents, because as I talked about last episode, the they preach one thing but act in another way, right? And the hypocrisy of it all. And of course, we as human beings are hypocritical beings, and generally, but we try to do the best that we can. And I think it's letting go of that judgment towards others, and just, there's a Stoic principle of, have a high standard for yourself and lower it for others. And I think we've kind of flipped that on its head. We have a low standard for ourselves and a high standard for others. I like talking about this stuff because this is the underbelly of what this show represents, right? And the ideas that it's trying to touch upon. So, I'm going to try to weave those in as much as possible. But yeah, I think this was a very Will-heavy episode, even though there was a lot going on, because he knows the pain that he has caused Bartholomew. He's been responsible for a death before, more outright, accidental, but and a bad guy, quote unquote. But nonetheless, that has weighed on him. Now he is responsible for the death of someone good, so that weighs on him. And by the end of the episode, he has to shoot one of the Magisterium people, and that weighs on him too, because he just, drops the gun in order to leave. So he understands, he's coming to grips with what it means to move forward, and that there's gray areas of life. And yet, there's an optimism and an idealism to him, that he would prefer to stay kind of untainted by this. And perhaps there is a way. I think deep down he believes that there is. But in those certain situations, he doesn't know of a better alternative, right? That's the sad part about it. And we'll see, whether or not he's right or he's wrong, but that's the beauty of it all. And I love the scenes with the demons and their humans, the golden monkey, even though, excuse me, it doesn't speak, it's like a moral compass and a consciousness, just demons in general, right? And certainly for Mrs. Coulter, and I thought that was a good use to kind of see, the anguish and the pain that Mrs. Coulter really truly does believe, like she's doing her best to protect her, and meaning Lyra, and she needs her, and yet, and the begging of, wanting to go with Will, knowing that without being drugged, Lyra would leave Mrs. Coulter because of how much she hates her. And yet also at the same time, so you kind of get drawn into that. And as soon as the knife shatters, Will becomes useless to her, and she goes back to her sort of maniacal tone. And, it becomes that sort of thing of, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. And that grappling of what is your true nature. And the truth of the matter is, I don't even think Mrs. Coulter knows. And that's what makes her such a tragically wonderful character to watch. That was great. Bartholomew in the end leaves Will. I thought that was a, worthwhile something to note, because, he was willing to go along with Will up until a certain point, in spite of his reservations. But here he really kind of had to draw the line in the sand, so to speak, and leave. And I think that, again, part of the weight on Will's shoulder, was there, right? So that was good to kind of see. Also, just Yurik, our armored bear fighting the Magisterium. I thought that was a fun scene in general. I love Uric. Thought he did really, really well, right? So I want to shift gears now to Magisterium, right? You could tell that they're planning something very diabolical, right? Which is obviously, in this sense, to get Lyra, because she's prophesized as Eve, the originator of all sin, and therefore she must be destroyed, right? And yeah, I mean, not much necessarily to say about it. It's just, yeah, I think it's a counterpoint to everything that's happening, especially as we dive more into the Lord Asriel. It will be very much that opposition directly and, through ideology, let's say, of what Lord Asriel is trying to do. And, in that way, as kind of I've been hinting at it and talking about it here, Lord Asriel has an aspiration, right? Whereas the Magisterium certainly, they've talked about ruling with fear. They're very restrictive and things of that nature. So obviously two opposing forces there, literally, ideologically and so forth. And that's what makes seeing Lord Asriel's camp really great, is because we get to deep dive into this and what he plans. And I thought, in particular, what was of note in this episode was when we'll call him the evil angel, for a distinction, but when he's essentially interrogating the authorities, Angel. The angel says, like, the creator authority doesn't even know who you are. You are of no significance to him. And if he did know about you, he would essentially squash you like a bug. Which I thought was a good use, because for, since essentially season 1, episode 1, Lord Asriel has been made out to be this larger-than-life character, and we've certainly built him up in that way. I mean, this is a guy who's going to take on the authority, right? And yet he means nothing. And it's not that he knows his cause is just. Like he sees himself as a pawn in something much greater than himself, right? It's not like he feels like he's the one, the liberator, and so forth. And yet, even in that, it's not that he overvalues his significance. He undervalues Lyra's, right? And as much as he tries to rail against this, all signs point to Lyra has a significant part to play in this. When I talked about demons being our conscious and so forth, that's why I loved how his demon really went at him and pushed him, because there is a love from Lord Asriel for Lyra, but he blindly is about this cause, which is fine, except he's also blind to how special Lyra is, and as he says, when is Lyra not in danger? So yeah, I thought that was a great use of it, overall, and the intention craft I thought was wonderful, and he's, going off and trying to at that point do the right thing, and when I say the right thing, of course, there's the underlying aspect of it that he's doing it because he learned about the knife, right? The God killer knife, the one weapon. And so this whole episode, we get an overview of, his grand plan, which is to create distraction and so forth. But it's not like he had a true sense of how the war was going to be won. Now he can have the distraction, and he knows the tool that he needs in order to destroy the authority, which is Will and his knife. So that was a really motivating factor for him. And as I said, the demon, when they're in the detention craft, aptly named, she tells him, you have to have a clear mind. Or I forget exactly the quote, but he kind of scolds her and says, like, I got it, type of thing. And he gets there too late. I thought we were going to get a scene with him and Mrs. Coulter. I think the two of them are so dynamic together on screen. Maybe we will get it in the next episode, but yeah, I really did appreciate, how it all came to a head. And yeah, I mean, it's just, all these forces converging, and we end the episode with Lyra and Will together, and she grabs his hand, and there's a love for them there. They need each other, and essentially it's just, it's the episode ends in a way of like, it's them against the world sort of thing. So yeah, that was neat to see. Also, we get our scientist, right? I talked about how last episode we didn't get anything with her. This episode we do. She's utilizing her sticks, her own makeshift lithiometer, if you will. And, she's traveling forth to where she feels that she needs to, not even feel like where she's essentially being told to. And she's learning kind of the significance of all of this. And in particular, kind of her place amongst all this and what she must do, and the sacrifices that it will take on her part and everyone else's. And, because she talks about, having left the community a long time ago and the pain of that. I thought that was nicely layered in, because I think, just in general, every character is going to have to deal with something and make these tough choices. And so, yeah, we're kind of getting insight into her. I thought she was just absolutely wonderful. I think she does a great portrayal of the character. So that's kind of the general thoughts, if you will, of just the episode. But now I'm going to move into tying in the book a little bit. So if you have not read the books, I would tune out, or if you're not averse to the spoilers, then fine, listen in. But you have been warned. So in particular, the expansion of Lord Asriel, that's certainly not within the books. I mean, we of course get Lord Asriel, but, not to this level. And I actually like the inclusion of this. I think it's really well done. And I love how we can kind of take our time with all this, because, in the book, it's detailed enough, but it's like these first two episodes really amount to, as I recall, maybe like the first 40 to 50, let's say at best, 70 pages of this book, right? And so there's a lot that we get, to be able to explore, and as I said, like Amma, she's part of the books, but really being able to sit with her a little bit more and have her be more ever present in a scene, even if she's not doing anything, like, just her observing and stuff like that. Just literally like time on the screen adds something of significance. So I appreciate that. The magisterium in the books does come for Lyra, but we don't get as much of the planning of it all. It just kind of happens. And I forget like how it all exactly plays out, but I do appreciate Mrs. Coulter's diabolical nature. Even with the magisterium, she tries to trick them, right? I thought that was a nice, clever touch, and whatnot. And yeah, the knife shattering, of course, that's significant. It does happen in the books. I'm excited to see how that goes because we know that they eventually do piece it together. And I love this land of the dead, right? You know, in the books themselves, we get that kind of teasing, you know, little anecdotal, like they're doing it a good translation of how it is in the books, in terms of hinting at this land of the dead. And, you know, as far as their next destination, certainly, you know, that will be their big goal. And it's no secret that what Lyra wants, you know, will essentially follow her. And yeah, I think there's a lot there, and I'm looking forward to that. One of the things, you know, so of course, like having read the books, Lyra is Eve, Will is Adam, and our scientist friend, you know, she's the serpent, if you will, right? So that's kind of the representation of it all. And the bond, you know, to really be Adam and Eve, you know, there's a romantic love, right? And in the books, I thought it was handled really well, because, you know, they're not even adolescent, right? Like that's the whole point of, you know, the demons taking final form is it's essentially, you know, they're becoming adults. And because of the nature of having to have filmed a little bit later than they would have wanted to, given the pandemic, you know, the actors themselves who portray Will and Lyra, you know, Daphne Keane and Amir, you know, are older, right? You know, I don't know their exact age at the time of filming, but, you know, quite literally now they are adults, right? And I think, you know, that does help a little bit with that side of it, you know, as they kind of start to explore, because we'll see how they handle everything as far as, you know, the sexual exploration. Not that Will and Lyra ever have sex in the books, but it's the birth of their curiosity certainly towards that, right? So I don't know. I don't know. I guess what I'm saying is it makes it more palatable to watch, knowing that they are a little bit older than, you know, than they are in the books. And again, the books I thought handled it really well, and made it true of like adolescent love. But yeah. Anyway, I think you know, the chemistry of those two actors is really there. It's fantastic. So a lot to look forward to. You know, I forget again. Like I know the broad strokes of the books. So, you know, I know Will and Lyra go towards the land of the dead, and I'm excited for that. You know, as far as our scientists, you know, ending up in the world, and creating the Amber Spyglass. I'm really excited for that, and the way the book ends. But yeah, I mean, it's just been such a while, so I've forgotten like all the full details, and, you know, to some extent, I don't know where we're headed next, to be honest, you know, in terms of the exact minute details. So I'm excited. And of course, you know, they've changed up things here and there. And overall, I'm liking the changes. So really fun to watch. But yeah, I'm curious to know from your perspective what you thought of the episode, how things are going. And yeah, just thoughts in general. Anyway, thank you so much. I truly appreciate you. And I'll see you for the next episode.